You want to know something that just gets my blood boiling? Is when I read useless characters. When I see useless characters on the screen. Why are these individuals taking up necessary space and oxygen within a good story? In fact, sometimes these useless characters can actually bog down a story. Oh, it's so frustrating. It's so aggravating. And it can honestly ruin some really great stories out there. So that's what I want to get to with this Writer's Rants. Hi there, everyone. Lars here from Camille's Harem. Not just a podcast for novice writers by novice writers, but also a YouTube channel by novice writers for novice writers. Because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends. And to give you an example of an absolutely useless, worthless character in a story is Jace from the Five Kingdoms. Oh boy. Brandon Mole, I have such high expectations for you because you're such an amazing author. He absolutely is. He has proven himself time and time again with his Candy Shop Wars, with Beyonders, with Fablehaven. Brandon Mole is a very capable, very amazing writer. However, even he can make mistakes, and Jace is definitely one of those mistakes. The Five Kingdoms series is a really awesome story about kids who are kidnapped from Earth and taken into this other dimension to be sold as slaves. Now, that doesn't sound very awesome, but one of those kids breaks loose and goes on this grand quest to save all of his friends by traveling to the different magical kingdoms within this dimension and rallying the troops, rallying the heroes, and becoming a great hero himself. It's a really, really awesome story with some fantastically imaginative ideas. And if you're a fan of Beyonders, keep your eyes open because there are some really cool things that Brandon Mole does in the Five Kingdoms series to build up on some of the stuff introduced in Beyonders. The Five Kingdoms series also is kind of his potential gateway story into creating a multiverse. He himself has said he's not sure if he's going to do that or not, but there's so much good stuff within the Five Kingdoms series. However, there is a character who bogs down literally every book but the fourth one, and that's because in the fourth one he is ritualistically murdered and kept dead for most of the book until he's brought back to life in the fifth book. Oh, that was such a sad thing to read. The character Jace is a bully. He is someone who is a part of these pirate scavengers who goes and collects items and treasures from these booby-trapped magical islands that go floating through space. Really cool idea, really amazing action scenes, and potentially a really good character. The problem is this: Jace is just a bully who is always there to annoy Cole, the main character, to make fun of him, and to use a magic rope to beat people up. That is all Jace is. Yes, he has a crush on the princess. Yes, he ends up with the princess. And no, I don't mind spoiling this because it's stupid. Jace does nothing to earn the princess's affection. Jace never does anything to improve as a character, and Jace is literally useless unless he is using that rope. He does nothing to improve any of the characters. He himself never improves. He never brings anything to the story. Literally everything throughout the entire series that Jace says or does could have been done and explained better by other characters, and oftentimes is. Brandon Mole introduced Jace as a character because Brandon Mole likes having bully characters who are eventually redeemed. It's one of the things that he likes to do throughout all of his stories. But with Jace, he absolutely failed. And he failed because he just forgot along the way, apparently. Like Benioff and Weiss made Danny just simply forget stuff. People, he just forgot that Jace should actually grow as a character. Oh, it's so frustrating. I like the idea of bullies becoming awesome characters. If you don't believe me when I say that, you should go check out my Cruzy videos. So already, this is one of the ways in which you can tell that you are dealing with a useless character. If a character who is around for a significant amount of time never develops as an individual, and Jace never develops, he literally takes up space. And because he's introduced as a bully and never progresses beyond that, he's just an annoying force within the story who doesn't do anything to change anyone. Well, I mean it. And not even Cole ever really gets over it. It's stupid. Just things fell apart, and it honestly is a huge blemish on what could have been and should have been a very great fantasy series. Jace really does undermine and even destroys certain aspects of the Five Kingdoms saga. Now, as a far more noticeably useless character would be Bronwyn from Rings of Power. Now then, I say this because yes, unfortunately, Bronwyn is a useless character. And if you've gone back and have actually watched my reviews and analyses of the show, you will know this. I went in wanting Bronwyn and Arondir to actually have a beautiful, amazing romance. I was really looking forward to that. But there's no romance between Bronwyn and Arondir. So that aspect is gone. Alright, so then we expect Bronwyn to be a good mother. She is a horrible mother. We get a couple of scenes where she looks at her son fondly, ruffles his hair, and gives him a kiss. Okay, out of 9+ hours, those moments tally up to less than a minute's worth of runtime. That is not a whole lot to establish a loving relationship between mother and son. And when you look at her son Theo, it's very clear that she has raised him wrong because the guy is insane. He is a sweaty ball of angst who is addicted to the sword, much like someone would be addicted to heroin. So, wow, Bronwyn, you are not a good mother. So, okay, Bronwyn's not a good lover. She's not a good mother. Is she a good healer? No, because she doesn't do any healing in the series until the second to last episode, and then when it matters, she's like, oh, I can't heal this man. He needs elvishmatism. What do we have you there for? You can't heal anyone. Alright then, so are you a good soldier? No, you're not. The plot gave you the showrunners gave you plot armor, so that way you could survive fighting a couple of orcs. She's honestly, in every single scene where we see Bronwyn fight, she is a horrible fighter who survives because the plot says she's going to survive. She should not survive when even more competent warriors than her in her village die like dogs to orcs. Okay, so Bronwyn, you're not a good mother, you're not a good lover, you're not a good healer, you're not a good warrior. Surely you can be a good leader. No, and that's mostly because the showrunners didn't know how to write good leadership into their stories, or nor how to write rousing dialogue, or rousing, invigorating, motivating, charismatic speeches. They could do none of that. So as a result, whenever Bronwyn has to step into her role as leader, she sounds absolutely incompetent. So for a character who I wanted to be good, this character could do absolutely nothing. Bronwyn just takes up space. In fact, if you had actually removed Bronwyn from the equation and had Theo living out on his own as an orphan, as the partially orphaned son of Arondir, because we know that he's the son of Arondir, that would have actually been very interesting. That would have explained why he is a bit of a jerk and why he is underdeveloped, socially speaking. And it would give Arondir some really interesting context as being someone who's trying to come in as both the literal and figurative father figure to Theo. And it would have made Arondir a more interesting and engaging, deep character. Because at least Arondir actually does things within the story, and Theo actually does one thing within the story that's important, and that is getting a hold of the sword, which will be used to create Mordor. Oh, that's such a stupid subplot. But we're here to talk about useless characters, and unfortunately, within the subplot, the unnecessary subplot of the Southlands, Bronwyn is the most unnecessary character in the entire unnecessary subplot, making her wholly and truly a useless character. Then let's have a look at another character who, yes, I am going to rain down so much flack on myself, but hear me out. A character who became useless, who didn't start off as useless. Oh, no. In fact, he was one of my favorite characters, is Lopen from the Stormlight Archive. Lopen is great. Lopen brings so much levity and insight to a dark story, and it plays off as a wonderful foil character to so many others at the beginning of the series. Honestly, The Way of Kings succeeds in part because of Lopen, and the Words of Radiance works out because of Lopen. Lopen is far from a useless character. He's actually really, really awesome. But when we get into the other books, he becomes one note. He, as Nathan would say, becomes Flanderized. Just as Flanders, who is a funny, interesting character at first in The Simpsons, just became a walking one-note joke. And that's what Lopen becomes. Lopen is a walking one-note joke. And some people find it funny, just as people find Flanders funny, and that's totally fine. But for a character who is once so dynamic and so interesting and so integral to everything, to the plot and to the other characters, Lopen now just kind of becomes useless. And that's annoying. That's so frustrating because I freaking loved Lopen in the first two books. The problem is that he never developed as a character. And so that brings us then back to a character like Jace. Jace could have been interesting if he had developed any. Lopen doesn't. And it kind of contradicts some of the things that Brandon Sanderson has said of what his characters, especially the characters from Bridge 4, are supposed to represent. Now then, What I will say here is this. As opposed to Jace being a huge blemish on the Five Kingdoms series, Lopen just kind of becomes a goofy side note later on within the Stormlight Archive. The entire Stormlight Archive is a series that I heartily recommend to everyone because it is so well written. It is what modern fantasy really aspires to be. It is so creative, it is so epic, it's so impactful, it's so emotional. Really, it is everything that you're looking for. It just also unfortunately has a character who became useless through the runtime, and that's just so frustrating. Again, I understand and I respect that a lot of people love Lopen. You should have heard some of the arguments between me, my sister, and my brother-in-law over the character of Lopen because they absolutely love him and I can no longer stand him. So I understand that a lot of people absolutely love the Lopen. I used to love the Lopen. I still love him when I read books 1 and 2, but he is degraded into a useless character because he is never progressed as an individual beyond the first 2 books. So thinking about this right here, what can we then do to make sure that we ourselves don't write useless characters? There's a couple of things that you should think about. Number 1, how much space does this character take up within the story? Is this just kind of a character who's meant there to be there for 1 or 2 scenes to help make the scene feel more lived in? Like an annoying boss who's only there for like 2 or 3 chapters. The annoying boss doesn't need to develop as a character. You can develop the annoying boss and that makes the story far more interesting, but you don't necessarily have to. They're just there to help to better establish your main character's situation and the world around them. For characters that are only there for like 2 or 3, maybe even 4 chapters, you don't really need to give them a whole lot of development. Now then, a really good story will develop those characters and makes it even more awesome. So bear that in mind. But if they're only there for 1 to 4 chapters, or I would better say 1 to 3 chapters, you don't really need to worry about them. So they're just there to kind of help make the world feel more lived in. However, the longer that a character is within a story, you need to give them a character arc. You need to give them goals. You need to give them a vibrant personality, and you need to be able to establish how they react to other characters. What are their relationships? That really makes them feel deep and meaningful. The other important thing to note is this. If you have a character who is dynamic and interesting, like, let's say, Lopen, if you're going to have that character around for a long amount of time, you need to give them a character arc. Just having an in-depth, interesting character who might even have a character arc in 1 book is really awesome, but if you intend to keep them for the remainder of your series, they need to continue to grow. If we cannot see a character growing within a story, they become stagnant. And if they're constantly around as a stagnant character, they effectively become useless. And this is actually something really tricky and really difficult. And this is something where I can kind of excuse Brandon Sanderson senpai, even though I look up to him as a writing god. Yes, even he can make mistakes. And I know this because, well, hey, as a novice author, I make plenty of these mistakes myself. I have to go back again and again in my larger series, The Legend of the Ten Lords, to make sure that each book is providing proper character arcs to individual characters. And this is something that I've really had to work on to make sure that my side characters stay relevant throughout the entirety of a very large story. Yeah, you get plenty of the main characters, and you probably get even more than you bargained for their own personal character arcs, and you're like, whoa, these people have definitely gone through some things. And in that case, you definitely look to the side characters because the side characters normally then provide the escape and the levity and the fun that you want, and so they need to not just be fun and interesting, but they themselves need to have a meaningful story to help pull you along and not just be a distraction. Because if they provide as just a distraction, then eventually they'll become useless because then because if you're sticking around just for the distractions, it's not a good story. And if you are so invested in the main characters, and then boom, here come along these side characters who just exist as a distraction, well, that takes you out of the immersion and the experience of enjoying the overall deeper story of the main characters. So for every character who's going to be around for a while, even if they themselves are dynamic, they need to have character arcs for each story that they're in, for each book that they're in for a larger series. If you're just focusing on one book and that's it's just a one and done, awesome. Again, make sure that for characters who are around for multiple chapters and who aren't just there to help set the setting, they need to also be given not just in-depth character, but a small character arc that is fulfilled by the time that they bow out for the rest of the tale. I'm just going to say that this is one of the things that really bothers me when I read the Game of Thrones series, because there are a lot of very interesting characters who are thrown into Game of Thrones who are then killed off. And George R. R. Martin's like, whoo, this is because the world of Westeros is very dangerous and anyone could die. Yes, I get that. The problem is that when you get invested into all of these characters who die prematurely, what that then means is that any of your investment into the overall story, and especially into the characters who make up the story, it begins to wane and lessen to the point where you just don't care and you're just reading to see where the plot goes next. And then that's like reading a textbook, not like reading epic fantasy. This is one of the big problems that George R. R. Martin has with his story. His characters are useless, not because they aren't dynamic or because they don't have great character arcs, but because he kills them prematurely before there's any fulfillment or catharsis. And what that means is when you read an entire book, when you read hundreds of thousands of words to have no catharsis, you cease to care about the story. That is basically what useless characters do. Useless characters make you care less and less about the story. And that's why you need to make sure that you avoid putting them in. Alright, that will do it for this writer's rant. If you're looking for more writing advice, please check out our other videos here on our YouTube channel. You can also head on over to our podcast, Camille's Harem, found on Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, the works. We have writing exercises for you to check out over at our Pinterest page, and of course, we would love for you to join our ever-growing community of novice authors. And until the next video, y'all, please make sure that you stop writing useless characters and choose.